You're listening to Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello. You're listening to Season 5 of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, using my results-driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences. I help organizations develop their best-kept secret, their human capital. This podcast is designed to expand the conversation with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development, and what it really takes to create, develop, and maintain results-driven and high-performing organizations. Our guest today is Fajanie Cadet, a trailblazing organizational development leader with a bold and intentional approach to driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's right, we're still talking about it. As the first Global Diversity and Inclusion Director at Forrester. Fajanie partners with executive leaders to embed impactful DEI strategies that foster inclusivity and sustainable change. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about her. She's recognized as a top 50 under 50 executive by Diversity MBA Media and a top Chief Diversity Officer Powerlist honoree. Fajanie's leadership shines in groundbreaking initiatives like Wayfair's Culture Ambassador Program. She's the author of In First Place, How to Win Over First-Generation Professionals with Your Inclusion Strategy, offering actionable insights for engaging and retaining first-gen talent. She is a sought-after speaker, featured on platforms like SHRM, Society of Human Resource Managers, if you've been living under a rock, BambooHR, and the Winters Group. Fajanie blends theory with practice to deliver real-world strategies that elevate organizational culture. She's passionate about amplifying first-gen voices. She challenges organizations to move from passion to influence, transforming their DEI efforts into lasting impact. Fajanie, welcome to RDO.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor and a privilege to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. We've been trying to get you on, so let's do this.
I'm excited.
Let's have this conversation.
Let's do it.
So you're no stranger to leadership. Your career has been marked by bold and intentional moves within the DE&I realm. What inspired you to pursue this path, and what are some or have been some defining moments that shaped your approach?
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, when I was in college, I thought for a second that I was going to be an accountant. And had interned at one of the big four accounting firms for 2 summers. And while it was an amazing experience, I was always looking at the recruiters in the cubicles, like I could hear them in the cubicles next to me. And they just always sounded like they were having a lot more fun, to be honest. And so I always it piqued my interest. And I recognized that I wasn't enjoying what I was learning in school. I could do it, but it wasn't fun. And while I wanted to still be in the business school and be big picture thinking, strategic thinking, I wanted to apply that to something that you and I both agree are the most important assets of any organization, which are the people. And so I ended up shifting my primary major and focusing on HR, right? I wanted to be in the business of people. And so I started my career as a recruiter. I've worn many of hats. So I've done recruiting, learning and development, employee relations, been a business partner, learning and development, you name it. I've done it to some capacity. But I think I always say that informally, I've always been doing DEI work or this work. And I think a lot of that is driven from a place of lived experience, right? Being a woman, identifying as a woman, a first generation woman, a Black woman. I think a lot of sort of who I am shows up in the work through advocacy in the employee life cycle. But in terms of sort of defining moments for me, I will say that, so that internship that I mentioned that I had in college was actually, the opportunity came when I was a part of a program in undergrad that was sponsored by one of the Big Four to increase diversity in the business school on campus, as well as in the accounting profession. And I remember getting the letter in the mail that said, you've been selected for this program, you're going to do this thing, and we need you to just get a GPA of 3.0.
Okay.
I remember being really excited, showing the letter to my parents, and also thinking, why just a 3.0? Like, why not a higher GPA? Because I know that the average to get into the business school is higher than that. And so I sort of went in with a bit of a like arrogance and chip on my shoulder. I'm absolutely going to go and get a 3.5, right? And I did, but I say that to say, it was then that I realized, it wasn't until I started the school and I was a part of this cohort and learning about the other students that I realized that we were at a significant disadvantage walking on campus, that everything that was normal for me, or all of the resources that I thought I had, I recognized that my peers had so much more access and knew so much more and had exposure to so much more than I ever had. And that's when I realized, I would say, impactfully, right, the difference in socioeconomic backgrounds, right, race and ethnicity, and just our experiences. And that's when I started to become really interested in this idea of equity, right, and why representation matters, what inclusion is. And so I think informally have always been doing it. And then once I got into the HR space and identified the opportunities to really lean in with my day-to-day, I did that for some time and then decided, yeah, I don't want this to be a part of my job. I want this to be what I'm committed to full-time. And so, yeah, that's what sort of brought me to this space.
I love that story because it really sets the tone for, I think, for leaders, managers, for both sides, okay? But I'm going to start with the leaders and the managers. It really sets the tone for leaders and managers not to make assumptions, and kind of like we were talking about earlier, but then also when you're on the other side and you're thinking, well, I've got this and I've done this, and you are, I don't want to say measuring or comparing yourself, but when you look at, you're in these cohorts and you're thinking, wait, I don't have what I thought I had.
Right.
I don't know I know a lot, but I don't know as much as I thought I knew. And so it's an opportunity, I think, for both groups to kind of step back and then create a new conversation. And that's kind of what you did in your book in first place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I think it comes full circle because in the book in first place, I think the catalyst for the why is I recognize that experience, that aha moment that I had on campus extended beyond the walls of the university, right? Because I joined the workforce and I started working in corporate spaces full time and realized that it was almost like cyclical. I continued to have these moments of awareness, these moments where I realized that, oh, you're speaking a language that I don't understand, or you knew something way sooner than I did. You have connections that I just don't have, relationships that I haven't had the opportunity to build as of yet. And because of that, I found that I was sort of having these kind of conversations with my peers. And when I say peers, I've said this before, I've always identified as first generation because my parents migrated to this country, right? And so that's always been a way that I identified. But I realized in conversations with my peers in the workplace that the first gen identity is one of the most intersectional that there are, right? That regardless of race, ethnic background, gender identity, sexual orientation, it doesn't matter. But there were so many of us who were navigating these uncharted territories, these corporate workspaces for the first time without a cheat code. And right. And so I was like, wait a minute. And when I looked at the market, there were a bunch of books telling first gen professionals how to succeed. But there weren't a lot of resources about what organizations and HR leaders and DEI leaders could be doing to ensure the success. Because I think the data might be a little bit outdated now, but the last time I looked at the data, I think 56% of undergraduate students identified as first generation, but we have no data on the workforce. And so if over half of the students are first gen, it is very likely that we have a significant population of first gen professionals, and yet they're almost absent from mainstream conversations about DEI when we're talking about identity, right, in the workplace. Yes. And so I wanted to offer this resource to tell a bit more, amplify the stories of first gen professionals. Why are we the way we are? Why don't we have access? Why don't we maybe speak the same language or have, been exposed to certain things? And what can organizations and leaders do to prepare for us, right? Because the data suggests there's more of us than they think that there are, that we've talked about at least. Yes. And so how can we talk about what does that look like from a systems perspective, a process perspective to ensure success?
So, in that same vein, right? So, we're talking about what can leaders do to support the first gen, but then we also think about those same strategies need to be applied to Gen Z.
Absolutely.
Gen Z's increasingly entering the workforce. I think this year, 2025, they're going to make up 30% of the workforce. Studies show that many of them are also first gen professionals, navigating uncharted territory in corporate environments. So this group often faces unique challenges, same as first gen who may not be Gen Z. So with that being said, how can leaders, do you have 3 or 4 things that you would say leaders can do these 3, 4, 5 things to support first gen or Gen Z first gen or Gen Z? What would you tell them?
Absolutely. I think, you're absolutely right in that. I think what Gen Z, the Gen Zers and first gen professionals have in common is that they are sort of, they're not the prototype, right? Like they are a different profile of employee, of colleague, of leader that I think the workforce is traditionally used to seeing and experiencing, and more importantly, supporting. And so I think what we need to do, or what leaders need to do, is be a lot more intentional in what that support looks like, right? A one-size-fits-all solution is not going to work. A copy and paste approach to how we've been doing things isn't going to work. It hasn't been working for the first gen professional, and it certainly isn't going to work for the Gen Zers entering the workforce, right? And so I think the couple of things that I talk about in my book is really all rooted in not making assumptions. We have to stop assuming that people have the blueprint, that people, because they went to a 4-year institution or not, that they know what happens behind these 4 walls, right? Or in this virtual environment behind the Zoom, right? We have to stop assuming that people are adequately prepared to show up, to engage, to collaborate effectively in the ways that are needed for innovation and performance. And so we have to be very intentional every step of the way. Don't make any assumptions. Be very clear. So I talk about career onboarding, right? I remember the first time someone used the term coffee chat with me. And I wasn't a coffee drinker yet. I am most certainly a coffee drinker now. But I remember thinking, I don't drink coffee, so what do I pretend to drink coffee? Is it okay to drink tea? What do I do?
Yeah.
I didn't know until after the conversation that coffee chat is corporate lingo for let's just catch up.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not drinking anything. Sometimes we're eating, sometimes we're walking, sometimes we're not. But those are the kinds of things that I mean. When we talk about onboarding, who is your organization? What does it mean to collaborate in your organization? What does that look like? What are some of the unstated rules and expectations or culturally that exist? What kinds of systems and tools are you using? What is the corporate lingo, right? There are so many acronyms and buzzwords. Don't just start using them. Create a glossary. Give folks proactively the information that they need. I think that's critically important. So that's one of the things, I think, setting folks up for success early. I think the other thing is, at least from a first gen perspective, and I think the same thing applies for Gen Zers when we talk about sort of the state of the economy and where we are. I also think that there is a need for more holistic support. So that means really being intentional about educating employees about the resources that they have access to, the benefits that they're offering, that you all are offering, and also from financial wellness perspective, that also being critically important, right? For some first-gen professionals, you might be making more than your parents are making or have ever made at some point in your career. And I say in the book, how do you talk to your parents about, planning for the future, financial planning, managing budget, when they've had to make lemonade out of lemons their entire life, and you just got a lemon tree that you have 6 lemon trees in your backyard, right? And I think we assume, again, that folks know what a 401k is, that folks know how to do all of these things. And we don't intentionally spend time educating our people. And the same way that we care for their physical beings, right? In the same way that we see more and more organizations investing in the mental and emotional wellness of their employees, I think we have to do the same from a financial perspective as well, right? Like, I do think that we should take our due diligence. And with the Gen Z folks sort of starting in the midst of inflation in a really resource constrained environment, these are the conversations that we can't just think that they're having elsewhere. We have to take stock, right? We have to be proactive and intentional in setting our employees up for success, whether or not they stay with our organization or not.
So Fajanie, I love this. I love this list. I love this as a starting place for leaders to say, okay, spending more time, talk about what it means to collaborate. We've got, every organization has corporate lingo. But then what about when you get Bob or Betty or Bill, and they're like, this isn't my job. It's not my place. Find it out on your own. How does that affect the onboarding? I don't know if that's the right word. The onboarding of this person, the culture of the organization, the thought. I mean, because I'm sure you've had and you've heard people
absolutely
push back on that. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so I love that you say that, because I think that, look, I know we'll get to this, the data piece, but I'm all about using data, using context, research, right? Both qualitative and quantitative that exist out there to support everything that we do. Now, for the leaders or the individual managers who say, it is not my responsibility to support folks holistically, it is not my responsibility to educate people on the things that they should just know, right? Or I had to learn by myself. I'll take this back to Dr. William Kahn, who is the founding father of engagement, right? So we all talk about employee engagement now. He started it, right? He created the Centennial research paper on it. He is the one who founded the term. And when he founded the term employee engagement, he highlighted 3 key drivers of that. The first was psychological meaningfulness, right? Which says I am someone who loves the work that I do, right? That I want to be able to feel connected to the organization. I want to be able to feel connected to this work, and I want to feel recognized for the work that I'm doing. I want to contribute, right? The second is something that we hear all the time, is psychological safety, right? And so, which says, I feel safe to show up and share feedback and speak up and engage fully without any fear of retaliation or consequences. And then the last one is psychological availability. And this one is really important because it's all about an individual's capacity, right? Can someone be able to show up in the way that they need to because there aren't threats to their mental, physical, emotional well-being, right? And so Dr. Khan tells us that without these three things, folks cannot fully engage. And we know that when folks are not engaged, they do not perform to their peak. They will not be the most innovative. They will not be able to be the most collaborative. They will not be able to drive those business outcomes that we are all showing up for, right? We show up because we have goals and objectives to do our best work. And Dr. Khan tells us without these three things, folks will not do their best work. And so if Bob in this case is saying, it's not my problem to worry about if Fajanie has her finances together, or if her mental health is okay. Well, Bob, if I do not, then that means I don't have the psychological availability to show up as the best employee, as the best team member, as the best colleague or manager. It's the same way if you're a Black man and every week on TV or every other month you're seeing stories of Black men being murdered at the hands of police, that is going to impact your psychological availability.
Absolutely.
You're experiencing microaggressions in the workplace, that is going to impact your psychological safety. If folks are not telling you exactly what the organizational goals are, how your work contributes to and influences those goals, if they're not sharing why your work matters and recognizing that with total rewards, with all of those other things, then you're not going to feel like the work you're doing is meaningful, and therefore you will lack engagement. And so it all comes down to, Bob, what kind of employee do you want? Do you want folks to do well and stay here and thrive? Or do you want folks to leave?
Yeah, I love that you took the time to back that up, right? Because it does boil down to what type of employees do you want? What type of team members do you want? Leadership is really, once you reach that leadership place where you're responsible for people, it is your job to make them the best that they can be. That's your legacy. That's your succession planning. And
Absolutely.
so, creating psychological meaningfulness, psychological safety, and psychological availability, it's going to come back to the team. So if I'm so overwhelmed, I don't feel safe, I don't have the capacity, then my work is not going to get done. And it doesn't mean I'm not competent in my work. Right. It just means that there are so many barriers in front of me that I can't see, and I have no support. And we spend more time at work than we spend anywhere else. And so, yes.
And with anyone else, right? Like, we see our managers and talk to our colleagues in most cases more than we talk to our kids, than we spend time with our kids, right? And so for those of us who are parents, so I think that it's incredibly important, and it's always about backing it up, because I think a lot of times we focus on what's happening and not why it's happening.
Yes.
Right? Or what could we be doing at the root, right? We're diagnosing and addressing the symptom and not the root cause. And so I think by asking, to your point, what kind of employee do you want to have here on your team? And while, of course, there are going to be things for all of us that are outside of our control and outside of our scope, I do think that it is our job as leaders in these ecosystems within organizations to, as they say, lead the horse to water, right? We have to provide the resources. We have to give the guidance. We have to make those connections. Now, what an individual does with that access is going to be up to the individual, but we do have a responsibility to provide those things, right?
All of the data is saying that. And you mentioned data, and I want to circle back to data. You know, all of the data is saying that, especially with the Gen Z population. You mentioned data with first gen. So data-driven decision making, I understand it's a core component of your approach. How do you balance leveraging data with fostering the human emotional side of this work?
Absolutely. It's incredibly important to have both. And so I do think data is integral to this work. I think it's integral to any work that we do, right? Regardless of the sphere that you're in. But I will say, particularly as it relates to leadership, as it relates to DE&I, the data is important because the data is our first sort of opening up the door, right? It's our first introduction. It's a way to debunk the myths. It's a way to sort of level the playing field in terms of we're talking about something that we all hopefully can understand, right? That can feel irrefutable. We are just talking about the numbers. The data is the data. That is critically important to shape the context for any conversation, any new project, any new initiative or business case. Now, with that said, I also think that the qualitative storytelling specifically is magical. It is essential to this work because you have to pair the quantitative with the qualitative. We need the data and the stories if we want real transformation and magic to happen. Because
it puts a face, it puts a picture to the numbers.
It humanizes that, right? Yes. Without the storytelling, the data is just numbers. And it also connects us to the data. Because if I give you a data point, it's so easy for you to say, oh, well, that's in Springfield, Ohio. Oh, that's in that organization. Oh, that's with that community. That has nothing to do with what's happening here, right? So I do think it's really important when we are leveraging data to leverage some of that external, right? That benchmark data, but also leverage your own internal data where you have it as well to help with making those connections. But then the storytelling is what humanizes that data. It's when that individual over there now has a name. They now have a story. You now know that this person is coming from this kind of background or family, that they might identify as a parent, that they were on this particular team in this year and that this happened to them. And we need those things. I always say, some people are in this work, right, DEI work, to change hearts and minds, right? Or that's their goal and their objective. Right. And I have to be transparent that is not my goal and objective. And I say that because I believe that it's something that is hard to do. And just because it's hard to do doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But I'm always, again, because I'm data-driven and so logical in how I approach things, I'm always thinking about what can I control? And so what happens is we all come to work with our toolbox, right? We have our toolbox that has all our tools in it. And think of that toolbox as your context. So we have how we grew up. We have our parents, we have the people we've met, our friends, the music we've listened to, the movies and the films, the shows we've watched, all of those things. And so when we are in the real world, when we are in the workplace and associating, because our brains cannot process all of the bits of information it's receiving at any given moment, our brain relies on pattern recognition. Oh, that smells like bacon. It must be bacon. Oh, I remember that happened to Johnny on the block. So I know what's happening here. We go back to that toolbox and we're like, I got it. So this must mean X. I'm in this job to work or in this work to raise folks' level of awareness. Yes. I want to fill their toolbox with other stories, with other contexts, with more examples, with different language, so that when they're in the workplace and in the real world, and they're trying to make associations because they're getting information so fast, when the numerical data is being thrown at them, they can associate that with Dr. Lowe. They can associate that with Fajanie. They can associate that with Rebecca's story. And that's when things start to really resonate. And where we can start to influence changes in behavior. But that happens by giving folks data, giving them connection points, filling that toolbox with different stuff.
I absolutely love that, because I believe that when an individual increases their level of awareness, then it opens them up to look a little closer at their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also opens them up to look at their change. Again, not making us responsible, but making that individual responsible for, now that I have my own data,
Yes.
how do I want to proceed? For
Yes.
some, they're going to make the adjustments, right? And for some, they may just collect the information.
Right.
And it's, everyone has a choice in it.
Everyone has a choice in it. And the wonderful, or I guess the bright side to the way our brain works is even the individual who chooses not to do anything with the information will still will still associate with that information. Because now you can't say you didn't know. You knew. You just did something different, right? That's where
you chose to do something different.
Chose to do something different. That is where the accountability piece is a different layer to this work, right? Is building in systems for accountability. But even the person who chooses to do something differently now has the information, and that's going to be stored in there for years to come.
Wow. That's good. That is good. That is good stuff. So, Fajanie.
Yes.
You're the first global diversity and inclusion director at Forrester.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what is Forrester, what they do, and what does this role mean to you, and how are you navigating the opportunity to build a lasting impact from startup? So you're a startup within this huge company because you're the first. Do you feel like, oh my God, I'm the first, I have all this responsibility, or I'm the first, I have a great opportunity? So talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I would say it's for sure the latter, right? Which I think is what really drove me to this role, was the opportunity. So Forrester is one of the world's leading research and advisory companies. And we support business leaders with information, resources, and tools to accelerate growth. And so the world's top CMOs, CTOs, CPOs look to Forrester for best practices that's rooted in data and research to drive growth in today's economy and business world. Prior to my joining, the work existed. I was brought in to really help operationalize, right, and build and maintain, and that's something that excites me, right? I think I've always been a builder, and when I think about these new roles, these opportunities, they feel like projects, right, so to speak. And so it's been an amazing journey, and I'm really excited to continue. Today's actually my 2-year anniversary there.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. So it's an amazing opportunity, and I posted about this on LinkedIn not too long ago, but I really see DEI work as change management work, right? I'm certified in organizational development, and that was an intentional choice for me, because when I looked at what does it take to do this work effectively, what does it mean to truly embed this work into this ecosystem, I started to see those connections to organizational development. And so I feel like a change manager in this role, right? It's all about leading people through change, and like everything from an experience perspective that comes with that, right? Gaining executive and leadership buy-in. It's designing and implementing strategies based on a clear vision, and then establishing norms, establishing new policies and best practices, right? And that requires a blend of skills: strategic influence, problem solving, project management, as
critical thinking,
stakeholder management, all of those things. And so, yeah, I see this role in these opportunities as organizational development work. And I think that that's very important, because I think particularly now when we think about the future of this work and what it will be or can be, I know that there are a lot of practitioners who have exited the workforce, voluntarily. There are unfortunately folks who've been pushed out. And I think it's very important to highlight what it means to show up and be the first to do something in an organization, and even if not the first, to facilitate systems change in an organization, and all of the skills that come with that. Because I think folks who do this work, those who are leading DEI, and hopefully doing it effectively, have so much to offer organizations outside of those three letters, right? And that's something that I think is critically important, and hopefully we're in the midst of an evolution to how we think about this work, but more importantly, the skill set, right? The competencies, the capabilities that are required to do it effectively.
As you say that, we can't have this conversation without talking about the future of DE&I. And so I was in preparation, and I saw a statistic, and it comes from McKinsey & Company, a 2023 report, and it says 70% of organizations express a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Only 27% report tangible results from their efforts. This gap highlights the ongoing challenges in turning intentions into meaningful systemic change. So as we look ahead, what do you see as the next big picture, next big challenge or opportunity for organizations in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in a meaningful way that's meaningful for everyone?
Busy professionals want to learn on the go? Start with Audible. Our RDO guests often recommend must-read books. Now, you can listen to them anywhere, anytime. From leadership insights to industry trends, Audible has it all. Get 30 days free and turn your commute into a learning opportunity. Visit our show notes to claim your free trial. Audible, your personal growth companion. Because great leaders never stop learning. Now, back to the show.
Absolutely. So I think that, there's there are all of the headlines, right? Like DEI is dead. I do not believe that I do not believe that it is. DEI is not going anywhere for a number of reasons, right? Like you talked about Gen Z, right? The world is literally diversifying faster than we predicted.
Absolutely.
It's going to look very, very different. It's already looking very different, but it's going to look even more different sooner than I think researchers had predicted. The data already tells us that DEI yields value. We just talked about how inclusion is the cure for lack of employee engagement, right? So I don't think that this work is going to go anywhere, but I do think that there is going to be it requires, or the current landscape requires, a shift in how we approach it. And something that I've coined and talked about in the past is I think DEI work and strategy has to shift from being passion informed to influence driven. And what I mean by that is when you think about the word passion, right? And sort of when this work has existed for decades, but definitely we saw the sort of reinvigorated momentum post 2020, right? Or in 2020 and post. And that was sort of driven by a passion that was fueled, which is defined as like an intense desire to do something. But I think what we're missing, or what we've missed, and where there's opportunity, is that just because you have a passion for something, an intense desire, or even enthusiasm for that matter, does not mean that you have the capacity, right? And influence is defined as the capacity to have an effect on something. And so I don't think that many organizations were or have been adequately prepared for this work, right? How to build capabilities so that we can truly have influence. And I sort of highlight 4 things that are incredibly important or essential to move from passion to influence. The first is strategic alignment. And so thinking about what does DE&I or DEIB, whatever the letters are in your organization, what do they mean for you and your company? What does it mean for Forrester in our case? What does it mean for wherever it is that you are, right? Forget what it says outside.
Right.
Outside of the organization. But how does this show up for you, right? How can we leverage diversity and inclusion as business enablement tools? Something that drives impact. How does this tie to our vision, our core values, right? Our operating model, whatever the anchor is. We have to define what that is and then make sure that we're aligned. The second step is the values integration. And so from a business perspective, we need to make sure we're aligned. But from a values perspective, who do we say we are? And does who we say we are have the undertones and the thread of diversity and inclusion? And if it does not, then should we be doing this work? And if we should, do we need to take another look at our values? Because the values set the stage for how we show up and what our expectations are. So I think that that's really, really important, is if we're not doing values work, if we're not reassessing or redefining the behaviors aligned to values to ensure that they're in alignment with this work, then we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
The other piece is the functional collaboration. And this is huge for influence. And so the same way we're talking at the top, what does this mean for our organization? What does this mean for sales? What does this mean for consulting? What does this mean for our product teams? What does this mean for procurement, for HR? We have to think about, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion look like? How can it drive outcomes in our part of the business? You need to be able to talk to your chief sales officer and understand, what challenges are you having right now? And then help them make the connection to, okay, if we know that, for example, prospective clients or customers are talking about supplier diversity, that being something that matters to them, and we don't have a supplier diversity program, then, guess what? I can help you solve this problem. I can help you with this. Here's how our work connects. But you have to help folks see those connections in the work that they're doing. That's super important. And then lastly, we have the employee engagement, right? Really leveraging the employee voice and experience as part of this work. How do we build internal champions outside of like the DEI Center of Excellence or the folks who have the letter in their title or do HR work? How do we enable champions by empowering them with tools to be allies, right? To be inclusive collaborators, to be inclusive leaders, so that they can sort of support the values building or the action, the enacting of the values on the ground. But I think the biggest shift that's happening is, if we think that we're going to get far by talking about why this work is good for humanity, I don't think that the data suggests that that was a lie, right? And when we think about the future and the rhetoric that exists right now, I don't think that that's enough. I think what we need to be talking about is, how does increased representation, how does diversity of thought and ideas, how does psychological safety drive, and psychological availability drive employee engagement, right? The biggest thing right now that companies are struggling with is, how do we increase employee engagement so that we can enhance our productivity and innovation? Well, if we do not have DEI or treat it as optional or compartmentalize it, then the research is clear, right? We're not going to reap the rewards. We're not going to realize employee engagement, because Dr. Khan told us years ago, right? He told us in the 90s that folks need to feel that the work they're doing is meaningful, but they also need to feel safe at work, and they need to have the capacity to engage in a way that yields outcome. And when there are threats to an employee's mental, physical, psychological well-being, that is happening both internal in our organization because of the way they're being treated by colleagues or leaders, or externally to our organization because of social unrest or political rhetoric, then they cannot show up. And so if we want highly engaged and productive employees, we need to help the organization see the connection. We need to help functional business leaders leverage their employees to their maximum capabilities. And that means that DEI is always going to be at the root. It's not going anywhere, but we have to move from being passion informed. We can't just push this because we think it's the right thing to do. We have to push it because it's the only thing to do to get the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, the business case.
Right. And it feels, and I understand that for some practitioners, that feels disingenuous, right? It feels like, why do I have to build a business case? Why do we need the data? Why do I have to keep telling you this story? You should just get it. Agreed, right? That information is hopefully information that folks have heard before, but that doesn't mean that we take our foot off the gas, right? For me, it means that I'm going full speed, more data, more conversations, more connections.
Yeah. I love what you said about the functional collaboration. If the sales team can apply it to their team, if you can understand how is this affecting your team, where you sit. Don't think about it, because I think it can be so overwhelming.
So macro,
right? But if you think about it from where you sit in the organization, it's easier to think about and create a plan around. I mean, she just gave y'all the blueprint. This is the blueprint right here. You heard it right here, 2025 on RDO.
Absolutely, right? It goes back to that, why do we tell stories, right? Why the data alone doesn't yield the results, because the data feels very macro.
Yes, it's too big.
It's too big. We need the micro to spark something intrinsically that will influence a change in behavior, a change in commitment, and then therefore a change in outcomes. People have to be connected to it.
If I can't see myself in it, then that doesn't have anything to do with me.
It gets lost. I'm not showing up to the conversation, the training, I'm not using the resource or the guide, the manager playbook that you created, because it feels like it does not apply to me. Right. And so we have to continue, as practitioners and leaders in this work, we have to continuously make those connections. We have to, be steadfast in our leveraging of quantitative and qualitative data, and are opening up the space to have those conversations. Because if you're not having those conversations with individual business leaders, then I think it was probably already hard for you, and it may get harder, right? Yeah. But that is critically important to this work, is help folks connect to the why, help that add something to their toolbox that they can use.
I absolutely love your approach. So Fajanie, you were recognized as a top 50 under 50 executive by Diversity MBA Media, and a top Chief Diversity Officer Powerlist honoree. As a recognized thought leader and speaker, you shared your expertise on a variety of platforms.
Yeah.
So here's the question.
Yes.
What's one message or strategy that resonates most with your audiences, and why?
One message or strategy. I think one of the things that resonates the most with folks is the human aspect of this, right? As we talked about, I definitely leverage data. I think that's very important. But I also think that we have to make things real for folks. And if I go back to that sort of toolbox analogy, I think that that's where it all ends and begins, right? Is reminding folks that you don't just wake up like this. You don't just think that a leader is defined in this way because it came to you. You don't just lead in this way because it was innate or natural. We don't just have these relationships with these people because they're in proximity, right? And so I think reminding folks that everything that we do is influenced by something subconscious in addition to conscious helps create safety and empathy for us to move forward, right? I think I lead with empathy. And so I say that to say, I know that what's in my toolbox isn't the same thing that you share in your toolbox. And it couldn't possibly be the same thing that, you know, this person on the other side of the country or on this other side of the world under completely different contexts or circumstances has in their toolbox. And so because of that, I am able to lead from a place of empathy. And I talk about that and remind people of that all the time. If there was like one thing that leaders, allies, and anyone could take from this is that we do not know folks' context. And even if you grow up in the same house with somebody, your context could be very different. And so lead with empathy and focus not on changing folks' minds, but on giving them more information, giving them more context, building their awareness, telling them more stories, exposing them to more stories, exposing ourselves to more stories so that we have the capacity to start to think differently, to associate with different things, right? I think understanding that is the foundation for this work, DEI work. I think it's the foundation for leadership, right? Is we don't immediately understand everyone's context, and that's okay. And we should work to try to create more visibility and awareness of what folks' contexts are, because it's not about the person, right? It very few times it's about the individual. And so let's separate behaviors from people.
Ooh,
and talk about the behaviors. Let's focus on the behaviors and the outcomes, these sometimes unintended consequences, but it's not about you and me. And I think when we can separate those things and focus on our tools, we can be empathetic. And that's the key to human connection.
Very powerful. Very powerful. Fajanie, what are you reading that we should be reading?
So I actually am not reading anything currently, but I'm about to read something.
Okay.
So hopefully maybe the listeners can be on this journey with me. But it is a book that was a gift recently. It is The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. I've heard so much about this book. And I'm so excited to get started with it. It'll be my first read for 2025. But it is, I mean, I know John C. Maxwell is a, world-renowned, recognized leadership expert, consultant, and speaker. And this just feels like a very timely read, right? I think leadership and what it is has unfortunately been a little bit jaded and misdefined and misused, it feels. In recent times. And so I think the time to read and reflect on what it means again and what it means to me and how I can show up as my best self, as my best influencer is really important. So I'm excited about it.
Well, you are going to love it. And we'll have to have you back to talk about your findings and how you are applying those laws to your work. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've been chatting with Fajanie Cadet, Global Diversity and Inclusion Director at Forrester. Visit the show notes to see how to connect with Fajanie. Be sure to grab a copy of her book as well. And while you're there, grab Results-Driven Organizations, the 4 Keys to a High-Performance Workplace, and our 2025 Leaders Reading List, our special gift to you for being a valuable listener. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. For all resources mentioned today, guest contact information, Dr. Tanya's results driven books, and your free gift, visit the show notes. We're dedicated to helping you create results-driven transformation. Until next time.